very good evening to you. You are watching Base in Focus, and today we'll be featuring a person who has been a leader in the entrepreneurial sector, and he has really made way in the market in the United Kingdom, and he was also one of the youngest millionaires at the age of 15. But his projects had helped many youngsters to head in the direction of entrepreneurship. It's something that Sri Lanka is looking forward to doing in the future. A very good evening to you. Welcome to Base in Focus, and we're very nice to have you, Mr. McVeigh.
Real pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Well,
let's just start the conversation by asking a question that really lingers in all of our minds. What is really growth? What does it mean by growth for an entrepreneur? Is it something that they start with a bigger capital, or should it be given a head start by a smaller capital? What is growth for an entrepreneur?
That's a good question, but for me, I started off by taking my dad's credit card without him knowing, right? For an entrepreneur, there's a lot of ducking and diving that goes on because you're overcoming, I would say to some degree, the establishment, the red tape, the barriers to industry. And you've got to think like, to some degree, a market trader. You need to find an apple, you've got to pay for it, and you've got to sell it for a little bit more. And then you go and buy 2 apples, and sell them for a bit more, and 4 apples. But how do we do that in a modern economy? And that's where it's getting difficult for entrepreneurs, because it's not as easy to go and buy an apple and hopefully within a year sell 10. But we need banks, we need bank accounts, we need government documentation, we need an idea. And we need to be confident the idea can sell and have others bring that confidence to us. So it is getting harder and harder for the entrepreneurs. But as long as they keep that spirit alive, they will find a way through.
Well, it's a known fact that their spirits are really crushed, especially the SMEs here in Sri Lanka, by the structure we've built for them. We don't have a sustainable structure for them in order to grow. There's a lot of impediments, there's a lot of red tapes because of the state and the government itself, because there's very little room given for the SMEs, because there's a registration fee, and if you want to conclude or even wrap things up, there is a fee that you need to pay in order to get out of the market. What do you think about that?
Well, the worst thing any government can do is create barriers to entry. And we need more businesses coming forward. Businesses generate money. They're the biggest employers. Small businesses are the largest employer combined in America. Small businesses employ more people than all the big companies put together in America, for example. So we know that they can drive revenue. We know they can drive tax income. So the last thing you want to do is stop them coming forward, stop them operating, or in some respects maybe keeping them in the black market, so to speak. They're operating without the licenses, without the regulation, without paying taxes, which has knock-on effects in many other ways. So my encouragement to any government is to make it as easy as possible for people to do business. And I think the UK has been very forward-thinking for many years of reducing red tape. I can go online now, and for less than $20 US, I can register a company, I can walk into a bank and get an account. Now, that doesn't overcome the challenge of putting some money in the account to fund the business, but I'm ready for business, I'm open for business. And if you make that challenging, and you make it cost prohibitive, less and less people are open for business.
Well, that being said, Dominic, how exactly can that be done, and how can you strike that balance between ethics and growing your market? How do you think that can be done?
Well, there's lots of very good examples globally that a government like Sri Lanka could copy. You know, literally carbon paste here into Sri Lanka. We can, of course, you can look at the pitfalls, what's worked, what hasn't, but technology is making that easier and easier. And look, there's 2 different things here. There's one, being open for business and being able to register for business. Second thing is your permits or your licenses. If you want to sell food, you can't cut corners there. It's got to be clean, fresh, and it can't make people ill. But if you're looking at, you know, selling apps, I'm not sure there's a huge amount of regulation that's required, and often the industry self-regulates. So if you develop an app and put it on Apple, Apple will scan it for viruses, they'll make sure it's compatible, they'll make sure it fits their family guidelines. So the app guy doesn't need much involvement from the government. In fact, we want as little involvement as possible so he can focus on the app. But if he can't have a company to register with Apple, he can't sell Apple the app. So the first stage is making sure the door is open to everyone. And then making sure the relevant departments or divisions, whether it's food hygiene or health and safety or environment, they are then getting involved in the procedures. But often for a small business, it's going to be some time before they need to start getting environmental licenses and health and safety licenses, because there might be a sole proprietor that needs a very simple license to sell candies, for example. So there are ways to shorten the process without having to compromise on the quality of what is being delivered.
Well, resources has been a bigger problem for the Sri Lankans here. Resources, primary products is something that we are blessed with. But unfortunately, technical assistance, training programs, USCAS, we don't have much of an opportunity in that way. Since you've collaborated with many companies in Sri Lanka and worked here for many years, is there any advice that you would like to give young youth in the country who would like to start their own company someday?
Well, I could talk for many a day about my experiences as a young entrepreneur. But really one of the things that I've learned is to keep asking questions. Research, research, research. Ask the questions. Get out there. See what is in the world. Try and travel. Try and study overseas. Try and shop overseas. Try and live overseas. We're in such a global environment now that you can sell shoes in America from Sri Lanka. But you've got to know what shoes to sell in America. It's all very well putting up a particular design, but if the Americans don't want to buy it, they're not going to buy it. Simple as that. So you've got to know your market. You've got to know your customer. You've got to ask the questions. And with that, you are better informed. You're better prepared. There's a lot of young entrepreneurs that email me from all over the world. Can I have some advice? Can I get started? A lot of them don't email asking for money. They just want some support. They just want to know it's possible. And you have to have huge confidence in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, why will anyone else choose to believe in you? There might be the odd person, someone like a Diane Gomez, who can see the potential and make you believe in yourself. But there's very few of them in the world. So if you want people to back you, you've got to back yourself first.
But Sri Lanka is now tapping into the digital market for digital services. But there's very little room when it comes to other services that the world really needs right now. And with sustainable development and Sri Lanka having a really good advantage in that sector, what sort of an advice, what sort of opinion are you of when it comes to really heading in that direction?
I'm working with a lot of these young men and women here in Sri Lanka, the developers, the mathematicians, the robotics engineers, and we're seeing lots of things happening in isolation. What we need to start doing, and what I'm trying to start doing, is connecting those disciplines together. Because when you launch, and I'll focus on an app again, because of the theme of technology, very much prevalent here in Sri Lanka, and some large companies providing huge back-end services for British banks, for example. But when it comes to the smaller guys, you might be good at coding, but how's your design input? How's the user interface? You might need a good mathematician, you might need a good marketeer. There's lots of people that are very good at certain things in Sri Lanka. We need to build a community and bring them together. We need to help Sri Lankans promote themselves better, not just internationally, but to each other. And transparency is key. If we're going to make sure that we have successful businesses, we need successful people to come together to make that happen. It's easier to do it as a collective than on your own. Particularly when it comes to technology, there's so many disciplines that are required now. You can't be an expert at all of it. But a good entrepreneur or leader will go out and find those disciplines and bring it together.
Well, since you gave me a hint into what my next question is going to be, I just need to know what your background is. How did you start or launch your business? Well, the answers after this short commercial break. Well, just before the break, we were talking to Dominic McQuay. He is an entrepreneur, and also he has made many collaborations with Sri Lankan companies. He's worked with many youngsters here in Sri Lanka. So before the break, I asked you, how did you launch your startup? What were your challenges?
See, I started very young, and I was naive. And because of that, the challenges were few and far between, because I didn't realise there were challenges. I didn't realise they were going to be there. I didn't have to worry about paying a mortgage. I didn't have kids to think about. I didn't have to pay for school fees or, worry about how I was getting to school in the morning. A lot of that infrastructure was provided. All I worried about, and I had one mission, and only one mission, and that was to sell lots and lots of scooters. And that came about through the internet and travelling. I travelled a lot. My father is a musician with the Royal Shakespeare Company. It's no longer touring anymore, but whenever he toured, he used to, in the school holidays, try and get me on a cheap flight out to stay with him. So I saw lots of the world, lots of cultures, lots of different products, way before people were travelling as much as we are today. And I combined that with, I had access to the internet very young. And that opened my eyes up even more, gave me access to more information, gave me access to more people, businesses, products, concepts, ideas. And I found a product. I found a scooter online, at the time, which was a fold-up motorised scooter. And I wanted one for me. I couldn't afford it. And I effectively worked out that if I could sell 5, I could get my one for free. Simple as that. So I contacted this company and argued with them to give me one for free, and they said no, but if you buy 5, we'll give you one for free and you'll make a profit as well. So I set about, over the course of a year, trying to sell scooters that no one had seen. But eventually I managed to sell, I think I sold 4. And I thought that's enough, and I convinced my mum and dad to actually let me buy them. They said, get the money first and we'll let you order them. Came in, sold the 5th very quickly. Had my 6th, which was my sample, drove around and showed it to people. And it really built from there. The product was on the street, people were talking about it, and my ecosystem to start with was my school. I sold it to my friends and my friends' parents. I went to quite a wealthy school. I wasn't a wealthy student, I don't come from a wealthy family. I realised there was money around me. And my drive wasn't to make pounds, my drive was to get a scooter for free. And that's the entrepreneurial spirit. That is, how do I achieve something? What do I want to achieve?
Well, that's something many youngsters here lack. Conducive environment, or even an environment that they can rely on to have their own product, even launch their own product, and really head in that way. And that there are a lot of restrictions. And have you seen any restrictions that's keeping youngsters from pursuing a goal in their entrepreneurial skills?
It varies depending where you are in the world. In the UK, the young entrepreneurs want it today. They feel doing the work is raising the money for the business, because it's gone to a scale now where you come up with an idea and you go and raise lots of money, and actually you don't worry if it works or not because you've raised lots of money. And they want it instant, the X Factor culture. Britain's Got Talent, which is a TV show, and you can become a superstar overnight. And entrepreneurs through TV shows like Dragon's Den has tricked people into thinking that you don't just have to be a footballer or a singer to be famous, you can be an entrepreneur now and be famous. And it's a quick buck, and look, there's several people out there that have made a fortune. And then you come to Sri Lanka. Actually, Sri Lankans, I think there's, to some degree culturally, is an idea where you'll go and work for your family, or you'll go and work for a corporation. So that tradition is changing, but slowly. It's changing quicker in those that have studied abroad, or those that have travelled. For the less fortunate, it's not changing at a pace. It's still, I think, I would say even more traditional, because there might not be a family business
Or
to go
what could
to.
really give that extra push for them to advance in that direction?
We need to give them the confidence to step out of the norms. We need to create environments where they can work with like-minded people and have mentors and instigators which can show them it's possible.
Well, Sri Lanka is now approaching into a very different avenue, which is going to be a skilled labor economy-centric, a skilled labor-centric economy, rather than a labor-intensive economy. What sort of an impediment is that going to pose, or challenge that's going to pose the growing economy of the country?
Well, my first question is, what is going to happen to the unskilled labour? Where are they going to work? Tourism isn't growing at the pace we expect here. There's not enough flights coming in. For the next 6 months after January, the airport's closed half the time. Right? So the jobs aren't coming there. The hotels are having a nightmare. And those that should be the future skilled workforce are not heading in that way. You know, something I've touched upon in the past is a lot of young skilled men end up driving tuk-tuks. They're trishaws. It causes an absolute nightmare for the traffic. I'm sure it's not good for the environment. And these men need to be in either apprenticeships, colleges or businesses learning skills for the future. And I use tuk-tuks as an example, but there'll be various areas where people are not ending up in that skilled workforce. So yes, we can set an ambition and a challenge to say we're going to upskill Sri Lanka. But first of all, what happens to those that aren't skilled? You know, we have in the garment industry hundreds of thousands of people. It's going to take many years to retrain them into new disciplines. But secondly, many of them might not want to be retrained. It's not just young girls and young boys working in the garment industry. You know, we have machine sewists who are probably in their 50s plus and extremely efficient, amazing at their job, proud to have them as my colleagues. What happens to them? So it's not as simple as saying let's upskill. And secondly, it takes time to skill a nation. And until we get the younger generation into the skills, where are skills coming from? I'm not against the idea, but there needs to be very strict policy and practice put into place to make it happen. You know, we can't say, hey, China's making chip balls, we want to do the same. China's been doing it for a long time.
Well, going green has been this recurring theme now in the business world. But there's also a challenge that every business faces when striking that balance of going green and sustainable development and keeping the business growing, keeping their market going. How exactly, you being a businessman yourself, how do you strike that balance? What sort of a stance do you take when it comes to environment, sustainable development, and also growth?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say doing good is good business. It's our planet to share, it's our planet to grow. If we keep filling it with rubbish, it's not going to be much left of it, let's be honest. Our challenge is not our businesses, it's not the garment industry as the manufacturer. The challenge is the brands. Brands have huge waste. The packaging, the plastics, the papers. Trying to get the brands to reduce the packaging, the plastics, the papers, and move to recyclable, biodegradable plastics and papers. That's one of the bigger challenges. In the garment industry, packing is lost money for us. It's something we have to do. We don't make a profit on it. We probably make a loss on it if you really get into the details. So we don't like all the packaging for starters. And adding to that, most of the packaging isn't great for the environment. So we do work with the brands to try and educate them on what is available, what raw materials are available, other techniques they could be looking at. And also, for factories to make money, they have to be efficient. If the electricity bills are high, we're losing money. Right? If our grids, if our lines are laid out wrong, we're losing money. If there's bottlenecks in the system, we're losing money. So we have to keep our waste to a minimum. The garment industry is very good at that. There's small mum and pop shops, so to speak, that won't be thinking on the lines of the big operators. But we're trying to reduce waste on a daily basis. And we urge anyone and everyone to do the same. Not just because it's good for business, it's good for us, it's good for each other.
Well, we are in conversation with Dominic McKinvey. More on this in Focus after this short commercial break. Hello there, you are watching this in Focus and we are in conversation with Mr. Dominic McVeigh. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, since you are an entrepreneur, exports have taken a nosedive. We've gone down by 6% in comparison with the same period last year. We are looking into new markets, but we are not reaping all the benefits that we need. Since you bring a fresh perspective to this, what sort of a market do you think Sri Lanka should capitalize on at this moment?
Well, the most obvious one, because it's so established, is the garment industry. It's there to be built upon. Some of the smartest minds in Sri Lanka are operating in the garment industry.
So should we just stick to that, or should we
not at all,
diversify?
We shouldn't just stick to garments. Problem is, though, the garment industry should be double the size, and it's not. And there's an easy win there. So, as we look long term, we need some short term results. So GSP Plus coming in would give a huge boost to the garment industry. I think you'd see 20% growth, quite frankly. The conversations I've had with all the European customers, they're confident that they'll do a minimum of 20% uplift in buy from Sri Lanka. That's just in England. Right, so you can imagine across the board. So garments is a short-term fix. And it is also a long-term solution because garment industry is becoming more technical. We're starting to talk about the Internet of Things, wearable tech, wearable clothing. Sri Lanka has the right people to make that possible. That industry is growing. That industry, in the last 20 years, was averaging about 2 billion a year. In the last year, it's grown to 4 billion. It's going to grow to 20 billion plus in the next 5 years. Sri Lanka needs to be part of that. And it has the ability to be part of that. So there is a short-term and long-term solution with garments. But what other industries should be coming here? Well, Sri Lanka is an ideally located island. It's in the Indian Ocean. There's lots of trade that can happen here. Historically, it was a place of trade. So I know the government is pushing hard on that. Yes, we should be looking at technology, but we're going to be fighting with the Chinese. The Chinese are moving away from certain industries and moving into the garment industry, into the tech industry. They've already done it in a huge way. So do we want to be fighting the Chinese for a bit of that? There's a lot that Sri Lanka, I think, can export in IT. There's a lot more it can do in that space. Construction, the infrastructure is not ready yet for big operations outside Colombo, but the issue with Colombo is the cost of living, the wages are very high. We have to remain competitive in some of these industries. The other risk is we have to be careful what industries we bring here because they might be highly automated. So they might bring revenue into the country, but they're not necessarily going to bring jobs.
Well, garment factory, one of the main reasons for the garment industry to grow is the research and development. They do tons of research and development, and there's a lot of expertise in that area. But you see very little research and development in other sectors, and thus the slow growth in other sectors. Is there any way you think they can really push that forward and get into research and development? There's any way where they can head into by being more competitive in the market?
It's hard to do research and development in isolation. So we need to get our young engineers in Sri Lanka into institutions, organisations overseas. Because we need them to develop the needs of the biggest markets in the world. The only way to understand that need is to be in that market. And then what we have to do is make sure our young men and women come back to Sri Lanka and develop those needs. But if we keep manufacturing in isolation or developing in isolation, our hit rate is going to be extremely poor. I'll give you an example. I believe last year, now you'll have to verify this, but I believe last year in Sri Lanka only achieved 1 or 2 international patents, 1 or 2. We have registered and we've got several patents pending in the last 6 months alone, international patents. So we're not out there. So we might be having ideas here, and I know there are things being developed here, but we're not out there protecting our IP like other countries do, and we're not out there understanding what is the IP we need to be protecting and creating. My company, with my shareholders and colleagues, has 7 patent pendings in the last 6 months. Last year, Sri Lanka only achieved 2. I'm just putting things into perspective.
Well, with that, we wrap up this edition of Biz in Focus. Thank you very much for joining us, McQuay. And I'm very glad that we had this conversation. We had a lot of insight while talking to you. Well, this is Biz in Focus. Remember to tune in next week, same time, same place. Remember, this is Biz in Focus. Stay focused, because the world around you is changing every minute.